The bottle sweated in my hand, condensation running down the brown glass like the sweat that had soaked through my uniform for 2 years in North Africa. I held it up to the afternoon light filtering through the mess hall windows of Camp Crossville, Tennessee, watching the amber liquid fizz and dance inside. Coca-Cola, the Americans called it. 5 cents at the canteen. The same price, the guard had told me with that easy American grin, that his 8-year-old daughter paid with her allowance money back in Columbus, Ohio. I brought it to my lips. The glass was cold against my skin, shockingly cold in the July heat. I tilted the bottle and tasted the liquid, sweet, sharp with carbonation, unlike anything I'd experienced in years. The bubbles stung my tongue, danced in my mouth, travelled down my throat in a cascade of impossible sweetness. In that moment, July 14th, 1943, approximately 3:47 in the afternoon by the clock mounted on the mess hall wall, I began to understand that we had already lost the war. Not because of military tactics or strategic blunders, not because of winter in Russia or Allied landings in Sicily, but because we were fighting a nation that could make this drink, bottle it by the billions, distribute it to every corner of a continental empire, and sell it to prisoners of war for pocket change. The fizz travelled down my throat. My hands started shaking. Not from fear this time, not from exhaustion or illness, but from the terrible weight of revelation settling over me like a burial shroud. My name is Werner Hartmann. I was born in Heidelberg in 1915, the son of a philosophy professor who survived the Great War with lungs scarred by gas and a determination to teach his children about German destiny. My father spent my entire childhood explaining the injustices of Versailles, the betrayal of 1918, the historic mission that awaited my generation. I believed every word. I joined the Wehrmacht in 1936, 21 years old and burning with conviction. I believed in the Führer, in German superiority, in our righteous cause. I believed we would humble the decadent democracies, that American soldiers were soft, that their mongrel nation of immigrants and capitalists couldn't organize a postal delivery, much less a war effort spanning oceans. I believed all of this even as we surrendered in Tunisia in May 1943, exhausted and outgunned, but still convinced our cause was just. I believed it on the Liberty ship that carried us across the Atlantic, even as they served us food better than our own army had provided in 2 years of desert warfare. I believed it when we disembarked at Norfolk, Virginia, and saw harbour facilities larger than anything in Hamburg or Bremen, though doubt had begun creeping in like cold water seeping through cracked boot leather. But this bottle of Coca-Cola, this impossible, unnecessary, perfectly carbonated bottle of democratic sweetness, was demolishing everything I thought I knew about the world, about Germany, about the war, about myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Let me tell you how I arrived at this moment, holding a 5-cent soft drink that contained more truth than all the propaganda I'd absorbed in 28 years of life. Let me tell you about the war that ended not with bullets or bombs, but with ice cream and chocolate, and the casual, devastating abundance of American plenty. This is the story of how America defeated Nazi Germany with sugar and carbonation, with frozen desserts and candy bars, with the simple, irrefutable mathematics of abundance that no ideology could withstand. When I deployed to North Africa in February 1941, I was 25 years old, already a lieutenant, convinced I was participating in history's great turning. Rommel himself, General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, had addressed our unit before we shipped out from Tripoli. He spoke of honour, of tactical brilliance, of showing the British Empire what German soldiers could accomplish with superior training and National Socialist will. I stood at attention in the Libyan heat, feeling the weight of my Iron Cross second class on my chest, believing every word he said. The reality of desert warfare was sand in your teeth, flies on your food, and water rationed so carefully you learned to shave with half a cup and felt grateful for it. We ate ersatz, that vile coffee substitute made from roasted acorns and chicory that tasted like burnt dirt, and hard biscuits that could break your teeth if you didn't soak them first. Our chocolate ration, when it came at all, was distributed like communion wine. Sacred, rare, divided into portions so small you had to make a single square last 3 days, letting it melt slowly on your tongue to extract every molecule of pleasure. But we were winning. That was what mattered. That was what made the deprivation bearable. We pushed the British back across Libya, nearly to the gates of Egypt itself. My men were tough, professional, proud. We endured the hardship because we believed in something larger than ourselves. Sacrifice was noble. Deprivation built character. Hardship forged superior soldiers. These were the lessons we'd learned since childhood, reinforced through every year of Nazi education. I remember sitting in a captured British dugout outside Tobruk in June 1942, sharing a tin of Italian meat with my closest friend, Klaus Bauer. Klaus was an Oberleutnant from Munich who'd studied mechanical engineering before the war, brilliant with machines, terrible with people. We'd found some British rations during the advance, tins of bully beef and hard crackers that the retreating Tommies had abandoned, and thought ourselves lucky beyond measure. "When we win this war," Klaus said, scraping the last of the greasy meat from the tin with his knife, "I'm going to open the finest restaurant in Germany. Real coffee, Werner. Fresh meat every day. Chocolate cake on the menu. Butter on the tables." "You'll bankrupt yourself within a month," I told him, laughing. "Nobody can afford luxury like that, not even after victory." "After we win? After we control the resources of Africa, the oil of the Middle East, the wealth of the British Empire?" Klaus shook his head, grinning. "Germany will be rich, Werner. Richer than Rome at its peak. We'll deserve it after what we've sacrificed." Klaus died 3 months later during the Second Battle of El Alamein. A British artillery shell landed directly in his position, turning his body into something I couldn't recognize and didn't want to. I found his identification tags in the blood-soaked sand and held them while the Great Retreat began. The turning of the tide that none of us had seen coming, because we'd been too busy believing our own propaganda. By November 1942, we were falling back in chaos. By January 1943, we were surrounded in Tunisia with dwindling supplies, shrinking ammunition reserves, and evaporating hope. The Americans had landed in force with Operation Torch, and their artillery never seemed to stop firing. They threw shells at us like they had infinite factories producing them, because I would learn later, they essentially did. On May 12, 1943, I surrendered along with approximately 250,000 other Axis soldiers. I was a captain by then, promoted in the field for leadership during the retreat, commanding what remained of my company, 32 men out of an original complement of 140. We were exhausted, hollow-eyed, waiting for the Americans to shoot us or starve us or work us to death. That's what we'd been told would happen. American brutality masquerading as democracy. American barbarism disguised as civilization. American weakness that would manifest as cruelty toward prisoners because they lack the strength for proper discipline. Instead, within 4 hours of surrender, they gave us K rations. I will never forget opening that first American field ration. It was May 12th, late afternoon, in a makeshift processing camp the Americans had erected with stunning efficiency outside Tunis. My men sat in neat rows on the bare ground, too tired to speak, too defeated to care what happened next. American soldiers in clean uniforms walked down the lines, distributing rectangular boxes like factory workers on an assembly line. 1 box per man, no exceptions, no favoritism, mechanical in their equality. The box weighed perhaps 2 pounds. I opened it with trembling fingers, expecting the minimum required by international law. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper and packed with careful precision, crackers, a tin of processed cheese, a compressed fruit bar, packets of instant coffee, sugar tablets, wooden matches, 4 cigarettes, and, I had to look twice to believe it, a small chocolate bar. "This is emergency rations," my sergeant, Friedrich Weber, whispered. He was 38 years old, a veteran of Poland and France, father of 3 daughters he hadn't seen in 2 years. His hands shook as he opened the chocolate, staring at it like a religious artifact. "Werner, this is more food than we received on Christmas. This is more chocolate than I've seen in a year." The chocolate was real. Not ersatz, not the sawdust and chemical substitute we'd choked down when we got chocolate at all. This was genuine cocoa, manufactured in quantities so vast the Americans considered it appropriate for emergency field meals distributed to ordinary soldiers. I bit into it slowly, letting it melt on my tongue, tasting sweetness I'd almost forgotten existed. That evening, they fed us hot food in mess tents they'd erected with the same mechanical efficiency. The meal was simple by American standards, I would later learn, but to us it was a feast. Pancakes with maple syrup, scrambled eggs made from real powdered eggs that actually tasted like eggs, bacon and milk to drink. Hot coffee with sugar. I sat on the ground with a metal tray in my lap, staring at more food than I'd seen in 6 months, trying to process what this meant. Around me, my men ate in silence, too stunned for speech. Some cried quietly while they ate, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on their faces. "They're fattening us up before they kill us," Weber said, but his voice lacked conviction. We'd all seen how the American soldiers ate. They complained about their rations constantly. They traded away portions they didn't want. They threw away half-empty tins of meat without a second thought. If this was how they treated newly captured enemies in the first hours after surrender, what did that say about American productive capacity? About American wealth? About everything we'd been told about their weakness and decadence and inability to match German industrial might? I pushed the thoughts away. I was tired, defeated, traumatized, not thinking clearly. These were anomalies, tricks, propaganda in reverse designed to confuse us. Germany was strong. Germany would still prevail somehow. The Führer had secret weapons, new strategies, alliances that would turn the tide. This abundance was just temporary, exceptional, meant to deceive us. But the anomalies kept coming, each one heavier than the last, accumulating like stones on my chest until I couldn't breathe. They loaded us onto Liberty ships in late May for transport to America. We'd all heard of Liberty ships. German propaganda had mocked them relentlessly as disposable ships, crude American attempts at naval construction that would surely fail in Atlantic storms, cheap, fast, weak vessels. Quantity over quality, a symbol of American industrial incompetence and desperation. The SS Frederick Douglass, the ship that would carry me and 900 other prisoners across the Atlantic, was one of those supposedly crude, disposable vessels. It was enormous, 441 feet long, 57 feet wide at the beam, designed to carry 10,000 tons of cargo. Ours carried German prisoners of war instead, packed into converted cargo holds fitted with bunks. The first thing I noticed when we boarded was the refrigeration. The ship had refrigeration systems built into its basic design, not as special equipment for this voyage, but as standard features. Fresh food storage, cold storage, ice machines for drinks, on a transport vessel, on a supposedly cheap, crude, rapidly built transport vessel that the Americans were constructing at a rate of 1 completed ship every 42 hours at peak production. Let that truth settle into your mind. 1 ship every 42 hours. More tonnage launched in a week than Germany could build in 6 months. And these disposable vessels had refrigeration systems as standard equipment. We were housed below decks in what had been cargo holds, now fitted with triple-tier bunks and adequate ventilation systems. Not comfortable, certainly, cramped and institutional. But far better than we'd expected. Better than we'd hoped. Infinitely better than the cattle cars we'd ridden across North Africa during retreats. The guards were professional, distant, but not cruel. They checked on us regularly according to a schedule, ensured we had water, answered simple questions in slow, patient English, or through interpreters. But the food, dear God in heaven, the food. 3 meals a day, approximately 3,500 calories, according to a guard who spoke passable German. Fresh bread every morning, baked in the ship's galley. Coffee, real coffee, not ersat, not roasted grain, but actual coffee beans, with sugar and tinned milk. Meat at lunch and dinner. Vegetables that hadn't been canned months or years ago, that still had colour and texture and something resembling flavour. The portions were identical to what the crew received. We were eating the same food as American sailors. Prisoners of war received the same provisions as free men serving their nation. On the third day at sea, June 2nd, 1943, I was on deck for exercise period. They rotated us up in groups for fresh air and physical movement, another unexpected kindness, when I overheard 2 young sailors carrying a large metal container toward the crew mess area. I was close enough to hear their conversation clearly. "Ice cream service at 1400 hours, one said to the other. He had a southern accent, slow and musical. "Captain wants to make sure everyone gets some before it melts in this heat." Ice cream. On a ship, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Being transported in a specialized container, I would later learn, was an ice cream maker capable of producing 10 gallons per batch. Ice cream is a routine comfort for the crew during a wartime Atlantic crossing. My legs went weak. I grabbed the railing with both hands, staring at the grey water below, trying to process what I'd just heard. Ice cream on a transport ship during wartime. Not reserved for officers only. Not a special celebration. Just routine morale maintenance for everyone aboard. As natural and unremarkable as morning coffee. "You all right, Captain?" It was Weber, standing beside me at the rail. He'd heard it too. His face had gone pale beneath his sun-darkened skin. "They have ice cream," I said. My voice sounded hollow, distant, like someone else speaking. "On the ship. While crossing the Atlantic, during a war, they have ice cream." "Maybe it's propaganda," Weber said. "Maybe they're saying it loud enough for us to hear." Psychological warfare. But neither of us believed that. We'd seen too much already. The food was too consistent, too abundant, too casually distributed to be theatre. This was real. This was normal. This was how Americans lived, even during war, even on ships, even in danger. On July 4th, American Independence Day, a holiday I barely understood, some colonial rebellion against the British, the guards announced there would be a special treat for everyone aboard, crew and prisoners alike. At 1500 hours, they brought around small bowls of vanilla ice cream, one for each prisoner. No fanfare, no ceremony, no speeches about American generosity. Just ice cream, served casually, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, as normal as distributing bread. I held the bowl in my hands, feeling the cold metal against my palms. The ice cream was starting to melt in the Atlantic summer heat, the edges turning liquid. It was pure white, flecked with tiny dark spots I would later learn were actual vanilla beans. Real vanilla, imported from Madagascar or Mexico, or wherever vanilla came from, used in ice cream served to prisoners of war in the middle of the ocean. I lifted the spoon to my mouth. The taste exploded across my tongue like a revelation, like prophecy, like the voice of God announcing the end of everything I'd believed. Cold, sweet, creamy, impossibly rich. I hadn't tasted ice cream since before the war, since a summer evening in Heidelberg in 1938 when my father had taken the family to an ice cream parlor near the Neckar River. 5 years ago, another lifetime, another universe, another Werner Hartmann who still believed Germany would rule Europe for 1,000 years. I ate slowly, making it last, watching my men do the same. Some were crying quietly, tears running down their faces while they ate. Others consumed it in complete silence, with expressions of such intense concentration it looked like they were solving complex mathematical problems. Weber sat beside me with his eyes closed, letting each spoonful melt completely on his tongue before swallowing, savouring every molecule of sweetness like a man memorising a prayer. When the ice cream was gone, I held the empty bowl and stared at the horizon where grey water met grey sky. They had given ice cream to enemy prisoners in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean during a global war. As if this were normal, routine, unremarkable, just another day in the American military supply chain. What kind of nation could do this? What kind of industrial capacity did it require? What kind of wealth? What kind of organizational sophistication? What kind of priorities and values and fundamental worldview could produce a military that served ice cream to prisoners crossing an ocean? I had believed America was weak, chaotic, mongrelized, decadent, soft and divided and incapable of sustained effort. These were core Nazi doctrines, truths we'd been taught since childhood and reinforced through every year of military training. But decadent nations don't produce ice cream on transport ships during wartime. Weak nations don't feed prisoners better than we fed our own elite troops. Chaotic nations don't organize supply chains capable of delivering identical food across thousands of miles of ocean with perfect reliability. Soft nations don't build ships at a rate of one every 42 hours while maintaining quality standards that include refrigeration as a basic feature. Everything I believed was wrong, not just slightly mistaken, not just incorrect in degree or emphasis, but fundamentally, completely, catastrophically wrong about the basic nature of reality. And I was only beginning to understand just how wrong. We docked at Norfolk, Virginia on July 8, 1943. It was late afternoon, humid and oppressively hot, the air so thick with moisture you could almost chew it. After 2 weeks at sea, stepping onto American soil felt surreal. We were enemy combatants, soldiers who'd fought against American troops in North Africa, standing in the heart of enemy territory. Yet no one seemed particularly concerned or alarmed by our presence. The Norfolk Naval Base stretched as far as I could see in every direction. 4,300 acres of wharves, warehouses, repair facilities, massive cranes, and ships. Ships everywhere. More ships than I'd seen in my entire life combined. More tonnage in a single harbour than all of Germany's naval facilities put together. Liberty ships lined up at the docks like automobiles in a factory lot, which I suppose they essentially were. Mass-produced industrial products rather than carefully crafted vessels. Destroyers, cruisers, supply ships, tankers, troop transports. The harbour handled more cargo in a single day than Hamburg or Bremen managed in a week. We were marched in formation off the ship, still wearing our Africa Corps uniforms bleached nearly white by sun and salt spray. A ragged column of defeated soldiers shambling through the greatest display of industrial might any of us had ever witnessed. American dock workers barely glanced at us. They were too busy, moving with practiced efficiency, operating cranes and forklifts, loading and unloading vessels in a choreographed dance of industrial logistics that operated with machine precision. While we waited in formation to be processed for inland transport, I watched a massive crane lift a pallet of supplies onto a cargo ship bound for the Pacific. The boxes were stenciled with destinations: Brisbane, Bombay, London, Algiers, Auckland, Calcutta. They were fighting a war on 4 continents simultaneously, supplying armies across 2 oceans, and their distribution system was so efficient they could mark boxes with specific cities thousands of miles away and trust with absolute confidence they'd arrive at the correct destination. But what shattered me, what really broke something fundamental in my understanding of reality, was something smaller, more intimate, more personally devastating. Near the processing area stood a ship's store, what the Americans called an exchange, where dock workers could purchase personal items. The door was propped open against the heat. Through it, I could see shelves stacked with goods. Candy bars. Rows and rows of candy bars in colourful wrappers organised by brand. Hershey, Mars, Nestle, Butterfinger, Baby Ruth. Names I would learn to recognise and differentiate. Price signs in neat handwriting, 5 cents each. 5 cents. A nickel. The same price as that Coca-Cola I would drink weeks later. A price so low that children could afford these items with allowance money, with coins found in sofa cushions, with trivial amounts of pocket change. "Look at that," whispered Otto Engel, a corporal from Berlin who'd been with me since Tobruk. He was 23 years old, thin as a rail, missing 2 teeth from a British rifle butt during the retreat. He stared at the exchange with the expression of a medieval peasant, witnessing a miracle. Is that just for sale? To anyone? Do they need ration cards, connections, party membership? No, said the guard, escorting our group, overhearing. He was an older man, maybe 45, with sergeant's stripes and a gentle manner. Just money. 5 cents. Anyone with a nickel can buy a candy bar. That's America, boys. Capitalism. Supply and demand. We stood there in the Virginia heat, supposedly being processed for prisoner transport. But all of us were staring at that little store with its impossible abundance of casual luxuries. Chocolate whenever you wanted it. Not rationed, not restricted, not reserved for officers or party members or people with connections. Just there, available, ordinary, unremarkable. A young dock worker, couldn't have been more than 20 years old, wandered over during his break. He looked at us with curious eyes, but no fear, no hatred, no visible animosity. Just the curiosity you'd show toward exotic animals in a zoo, interesting but not threatening. "Y'all from the Africa course?" he asked. His English was thickly accented. Southern, I would learn, from rural North Carolina, but understandable if you listened carefully. "Yes," I answered in my careful academic English learned in gymnasium. "Africa Corps. We fought in Tunisia." "Long way from home," he said, not unkindly. There was sympathy in his voice, genuine human sympathy for defeated enemies. He pulled a Hershey bar from his shirt pocket, unwrapped the brown paper with practiced ease, broke off a piece, and ate it. Then, incredibly, unbelievably, he offered me a piece, just extended his hand with chocolate in his palm, offering food to a prisoner like it was the most natural gesture in the world. "You hungry? You look half-starved." I stared at the chocolate, at this enemy soldier offering food to a German prisoner, at the casual kindness that seemed to come so naturally to him, as automatic as breathing. "Thank you," I said quietly, taking the piece. It melted on my tongue instantly, richer and sweeter than anything I'd tasted in years. Real sugar, real cocoa, real milk chocolate manufactured in quantities so vast that this young man could give it away without a second thought. "This is very good." "Yeah, Hershey's is all right," he said with a shrug, as if discussing the weather. "I prefer Mars bars myself. More caramel, you know, better texture. More caramel." He had preferences. Multiple brands of chocolate were so universally abundant he could afford to develop personal taste preferences, choosing one over another based on subtle differences in texture and flavour, rather than just being grateful to receive any chocolate at all. "You'll be okay up at the camps," the dock worker said before walking away. "We treat prisoners pretty decent, better than y'all would have treated us, I bet. But that's just how we do things here." He was right, of course. German POW camps were brutal, barely adequate even when we had resources. What we would have done to American prisoners in North Africa, how we would have treated them. I didn't want to think about it. The comparison made me physically ill. That evening, they loaded us onto trains for transport inland. Not cattle cars, not freight wagons. Passenger coaches with actual seats, windows that opened, and functional bathrooms. I want to emphasize this because it still shocks me to remember. They transported enemy prisoners of war in passenger trains with cushioned seats, windows with screens, overhead luggage racks, and bathrooms with running water and soap. This was standard American rail transport, nothing special, nothing exceptional, just what they routinely used to move people around their vast country. As we pulled away from Norfolk at sunset, I watched the naval base disappear into the distance, those impossible rows of ships growing smaller, and tried to calculate what I was seeing. How many ships? How many workers? How much steel? How much aluminum? How much rubber? How much of everything? Germany's entire industrial output for 6 months couldn't match what I'd seen in one American harbour on one summer afternoon. We rode through the Virginia countryside as evening fell, through forests and farmland that looked nothing like anything in Europe. Everything was bigger here, more abundant, less crowded. Fields stretched to the horizon. Forests grew thick and untouched. Even the land itself seemed wealthy, generously endowed, carelessly abundant. The dining car, yes, there was a dining car on a prisoner transport train, served dinner at 1900 hours. The meal was simple by American standards, but extraordinary to us. Fried chicken with crispy skin, still hot from the kitchen. Green beans cooked with bacon. Mashed potatoes with brown gravy. White bread with butter, and a slice of apple pie for dessert. Coffee with milk and sugar. All of it served on actual plates by porters who treated us with professional courtesy. The other officers at my table ate in stunned silence, methodically working through food we couldn't quite believe existed. Nobody spoke. We just ate, trying to process what this abundance meant, what it revealed about the nation we'd been fighting. "Werner," said Major Klaus Hoffmann, a battalion commander who'd surrendered at the same time I had. "What the hell is happening here?" "I don't know," I admitted, staring at my empty plate. "I genuinely don't understand any of this." But I was beginning to understand. Slowly, terribly, inevitably, the understanding was growing like a tumour. This wasn't propaganda. This wasn't theatre. This wasn't temporary or exceptional. This was normal. This was standard. This was how Americans lived every day. This abundance, this casual plenty, this democratic access to goods and services, this was their everyday reality. And we had declared war on them thinking they were weak, soft, unable to match German discipline and efficiency. The joke was on us. The joke had always been on us. We'd simply been too blinded by ideology to see the punchline coming. Camp Crossville sat in the Tennessee hills, surrounded by dense forest and rolling farmland that looked like something from a pastoral painting. We arrived on July 11th, 1943, after 3 days on trains that fed us better than our own army had managed in 2 years of combat. The camp itself was sprawling, barracks arranged in neat rows with military precision, administration buildings, a camp hospital with actual medical equipment, recreation areas, even a small theatre for films and performances. The barracks had electricity, not rationed electricity, not limited electricity, not electricity that worked only during certain hours. Constant, unlimited electrical power. Light switches on every wall that you could flip whenever you wanted, for any reason or no reason at all. Electric lights burning through the night if you couldn't sleep, if you wanted to read, if you simply wanted light. The casual expenditure of energy would have been considered criminal waste in Germany, where every kilowatt was carefully managed and rationed. Hot water flowed from taps in the communal washrooms. Not lukewarm water, not occasionally warm water, but genuinely hot water whenever you wanted it, day or night. Flush toilets that worked properly with adequate water pressure. Heated barracks for when Tennessee winter arrived. These were luxuries we'd never enjoyed, even at permanent military bases in Germany, even before the war, when resources weren't yet critically scarce. But the real shock, the thing that completed my ideological demolition, was the canteen, the PX they called it, post-exchange, a store for prisoners of war, where we could buy things with money we earned working. On July 14th, 3 days after our arrival, we received our first camp orientation and wage certificates. We would be paid for voluntary labour, 80 cents per day initially, rising to a full $1 after the first month of satisfactory work. Not Reichsmarks, not occupation currency, not worthless scrip, but actual American dollars we could spend at the camp exchange on real goods. That afternoon, I walked to the PX for the first time with Weber and Otto. It was a long wooden building with screened windows and a hand-painted sign that read, Camp Crossville Post Exchange, open 1300 to 2000 daily. Inside, it looked like a small-town store, shelves lined with products, a counter with 2 cash registers, American soldiers running the operation with casual, bored efficiency. But the products. Dear, merciful God, the products on those shelves. Soft drinks in glass-doored coolers, bottles sweating condensation in neat rows, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Dr. Pepper, RC Cola, Orange Crush, Knee-High, 7-Up. Different brands, different flavors, organized by type. 5 cents each. Take as many as you wanted if you had money. Candy arranged on shelves like a library of sweetness. Hershey bars, Mars bars, Milky Ways, Snickers, Baby Ruth, Butterfinger, Tootsie Rolls, Lifesavers, Jawbreakers, boxes of Cracker Jacks with toys inside, 5 to 10 cents each depending on size, dozens of varieties, multiple brands, more chocolate than I'd seen in 5 years. Cigarettes behind the counter, Lucky Strike, Camel, Chesterfield, Philip Morris, Pall Mall. 15 cents per pack of 20. American cigarettes we'd only smoked when we'd captured British supplies. Now available for purchase at prices so low they were almost insulting. Fresh fruit in wooden crates, apples from Washington State, oranges from Florida, bananas from God knows where. 10 cents per piece. Fruit that had been shipped hundreds or thousands of miles to a prisoner of war camp in rural Tennessee, sold at prices anyone could afford. Snacks and treats, potato chips in waxed bags, pretzels, crackers, cookies in boxes with bright labels. All commercially packaged, all industrially produced, all inexpensive, all just there, available, ordinary. And in the back corner, the thing that made my vision blur. A chest freezer, humming quietly, lid propped open. Inside, ice cream bars wrapped in paper, ice cream sandwiches, popsicles in bright colours, 10 cents each. Ice cream, in a prison camp, for sale to prisoners of war. As if this were perfectly normal, completely unremarkable, just standard operating procedure. I bought a Coca-Cola with the nickel they'd given us as welcome money. The bottle was cold, wet with condensation that dripped onto my hand. I held it carefully, like it might explode or disappear. The American soldier at the register, a private, maybe 19 years old, saw my expression and laughed. Not mockingly, not cruelly, but with genuine amusement at my obvious wonder. "First Coke?" he asked. "Yes," I managed to say. "You'll love it. Everyone does. That's why Mr. Coca-Cola's richer than God himself." I walked outside into the July afternoon heat with my bottle, found a bench under an oak tree, and sat down. Weber and Otto sat beside me with their own purchases. Weber had bought a Coke and a Hershey bar. Otto had chosen an Orange Crush and a package of Tootsie Rolls. I twisted off the bottle cap. The carbonation hissed, releasing a sweet smell. I brought the bottle to my lips and drank. And that's where this story truly begins, with the taste of cold, sweet, impossible American abundance flowing down my throat, dissolving the last remnants of Nazi ideology like sugar in water. The fizz travelled down my throat. My hands shook. The terrible weight of revelation settled over me like a lead blanket, crushing the breath from my lungs. We'd been told America was weak. We'd been told they were divided, chaotic, incapable of organising effectively or sustaining long-term effort. We'd been told their mongrel population of immigrants and racial inferiors couldn't match German unity, German discipline, German strength forged through National Socialist doctrine. Every single word was a calculated lie, and this 5-cent bottle of carbonated sugar water proved it more conclusively than any intelligence report or battlefield analysis ever could. This drink, this casual soft drink that American children bought with allowance money, represented industrial capacity beyond German comprehension. The standardization alone was miraculous. Coca-Cola tasted identical whether you drank it in Maine or Texas or Tennessee or California, because their quality control and distribution systems were that sophisticated, that reliable, that perfect. The syrup concentrate was manufactured in Atlanta, Georgia. It was shipped nationwide to hundreds of bottling plants. Those plants bottled billions of units annually with such mechanical precision that every bottle tasted exactly the same. Then they distributed those billions of bottles to every corner of America, to major cities and small towns and rural gas stations and military bases and prison camps holding enemy soldiers, and the system never failed. There was always Coca-Cola, always cold, always 5 cents, always available, always perfect. This wasn't just a drink. This was proof of systematic industrial and organizational superiority that made German efficiency look like amateur fumbling by comparison. I finished the Coca-Cola slowly, savoring each sip, watching other prisoners discover the PX for the first time. Their faces showed the same sequence of emotions I'd experienced: disbelief, wonder, confusion, and finally, the terrible understanding that everything we'd been told, everything we'd believed, everything we'd fought for was built on lies. Weber sat beside me in silence, eating his chocolate bar in tiny bites, making it last. Finally, he spoke. "I earned 80 cents today doing laundry work," he said quietly, staring at the half-eaten Hershey bar in his hand. "With 80 cents, I can buy 16 candy bars, or 16 bottles of Coke, or 8 ice cream bars, or 32 Tootsie Rolls." He paused, doing the mathematics that was breaking both our hearts. In Germany, before the war, if you could find real chocolate at all, it cost, what? A week's wages for something this size. If you could find it, I agreed, if you had connections, if you knew someone who knew someone, if the party member running the store liked you or owed you a favor. But here, anyone with a nickel can buy it, Weber continued. The Negro soldier who works at the PX. He bought a Coke and a candy bar during his break, just like we did. Same price, same products, no special access required, no party membership, no racial prerequisites, just money. Democratic abundance, I said, testing the phrase. It felt both ridiculous and profound, like a joke that wasn't funny because it was too true. "We're going to lose this war, Werner," Weber said. He wasn't asking a question. He was stating a fact, one he'd finally accepted after months of denial. We were always going to lose it. From the moment we declared war on this nation, the outcome was inevitable. A country that gives ice cream to prisoners has already won. They'd won before the first shot was fired. I wanted to argue, to defend the Reich, the Führer, the cause, everything I'd believed in and fought for and sacrificed for. But I couldn't. The evidence was too overwhelming, too undeniable, too physically present in my hands. The empty Coca-Cola bottle weighed more than all the propaganda speeches I'd ever heard. That night, lying in my bunk in the electrically lit, properly heated barracks, listening to 2,000 German prisoners breathing in the darkness, I thought about my father. Professor Heinrich Hartmann, who'd survived the Great War with gas-scarred lungs and spent my entire childhood teaching me about German destiny, about the injustices of Versailles, about our historic mission to reclaim what was rightfully ours. But he'd been wrong. Completely, utterly, catastrophically wrong about everything. We'd all been wrong. German destiny wasn't glory and conquest and 1,000-year empires. German destiny was defeat at the hands of a nation we'd fundamentally misunderstood in every possible way. A nation whose strength came not from military tradition or racial purity or ideological fervor or careful rationing and noble sacrifice, but from something simpler and infinitely more powerful: the ability to create such abundance that even enemies could share in it. The taste of Coca-Cola was still on my tongue as I fell asleep, my stomach full of American food, my body warm in American heated barracks. Sweet, fizzing, cold, perfect, impossible. The taste of defeat, the taste of truth, the taste of a world I'd never imagined could exist. The summer of 1943 unfolded like an extended education program that none of the American guards seemed aware they were administering. Every meal, every trip to the PX, every casual observation of how Americans treated resources that would have been priceless treasures in Germany, all of it accumulated like sand in an hourglass, slowly burying the foundations of Nazi ideology under the weight of observable reality. The mess hall served 3 meals daily, and each one was a mathematics lesson in American industrial and agricultural capacity. Breakfast arrived at 0700 hours, scrambled eggs or fried eggs, bacon or sausage, toast with butter and jam, oatmeal or cream of wheat with brown sugar, milk, coffee with sugar, sometimes orange juice. Not sometimes, not on special occasions or holidays. Every single morning, without exception. I started keeping a journal, writing down what we ate, not for any official purpose, not planning to publish memoirs, but because I needed to document it to believe it myself. The quantities were so vast, so impossibly generous, that I feared my memory would later tell me I'd exaggerated or imagined it. By the end of July, my journal recorded: eggs consumed, 93, 3 per breakfast for 31 days, bacon portions, 28 sausage portions, 15 gallons of milk, approximately 3 quarts daily cups of coffee, 62 pieces of toast, 124 with butter, every time sugar. Unlimited, available on tables in bowls. These weren't military rations in any sense I understood. These were the quantities a prosperous civilian might eat in peacetime. And there were 2,400 German prisoners at Camp Crossville, all eating the same amounts, plus American guards eating even more. The sheer volume of food required to feed everyone daily boggled my mind completely. "Where does it all come from?" I asked Sergeant Bill Morrison during lunch one humid day in early August. We were eating fried chicken, actual chicken, fried in hot oil until the skin was crispy and golden, with mashed potatoes, gravy, and green beans cooked with bacon. All this food. How does America produce this much? How do you distribute it so efficiently? Morrison was from Iowa, 35 years old, with a farmer's practical understanding of agriculture and no patience for abstract theory. He looked at me like I'd asked why water was wet. "We just do," he said, shrugging. "Iowa alone produces more corn than your whole country, Captain. Nebraska and Kansas for wheat, Wisconsin for dairy, California for fruit and vegetables, Texas for beef, Florida for citrus. It's a big country. Lots of farmland, lots of machines to work it, lots of trucks and trains to move it around." "But the logistics," I pressed. "Getting food from farms to here, the refrigeration during transport, the warehouse systems, the distribution networks." "Trucks, mostly," Morrison said, eating his chicken with his fingers, completely unself-conscious. "Refrigerated trucks for stuff that spoils fast, trains for long-distance hauling. We got good roads, good rail lines. Food's got to get from farm to market somehow, so we built the infrastructure to make it happen. Been doing it that way for years, even before the war." He spoke as if this were the most natural thing in the world, as if having a continental distribution system capable of moving fresh food thousands of miles was just normal, expected, unremarkable, the baseline reality of American life. I thought about Germany's food distribution system, rationing cards with stamps for different categories, Long queues outside shops that might or might not have food when you reach the front. Black markets where you needed connections to buy basics at inflated prices. Elaborate systems of favoritism and party membership that determined who ate well and who went hungry. Even before the war, German efficiency was nothing remotely like this American casual abundance. But America was fighting a global war on multiple continents, supplying armies across 2 oceans, and still feeding prisoners of war better than Germany fed its own citizens in peacetime. The mathematics didn't work. The scales didn't balance. We had entered a contest we could never win because we'd fundamentally misunderstood what kind of nation we were fighting, what kind of economic system we were challenging, what kind of productive capacity we were opposing. August brought work details, and with them, deeper glimpses into American civilian society beyond the camp fence. The Geneva Convention required that officers not be forced to work, but it permitted voluntary labor for pay. Most of us volunteered eagerly. The alternative was sitting in camp, going slowly mad with boredom and overthinking, dwelling on defeat and captivity and uncertain futures. I was assigned to a forestry detail, clearing brush and maintaining trails in the Tennessee state forests surrounding Camp Crossville. It was honest physical work, straightforward and satisfying, a relief after years of military hierarchy and the complex moral compromises of serving Nazi Germany. We worked 6 hours daily, 5 days per week, earning our $1 per day in wages that we could spend on Coca-Cola and chocolate and ice cream. But the work itself mattered less than what we observed while doing it. The American civilian workers we encountered on these details treated us with casual friendliness that would have been completely impossible in Germany. We were enemy soldiers, men who'd fought against American troops in Africa, men whose country had declared war on America and sought its destruction. Yet the local foresters shared their lunches with us, taught us American work songs, showed us photographs of their families, asked about our homes in Germany with genuine curiosity rather than hostility. "You seem like decent fellows to me," said Red Hutchins, a forestry supervisor from Crossville who couldn't have been older than 45. He was tall and lean, missing most of his left ear from the Great War, with a metal plate in his skull from the Meuse-Argonne offensive. "I don't hold no grudge against individual Germans. Hell, I was shooting at German soldiers 25 years ago in France. Now we're all just trying to get by and do our jobs. War's politicians' business. Rest of us just gotta survive it." His lunch that day, which he shared generously with me and Weber while we sat on a fallen pine log during break time, consisted of 2 thick sandwiches of ham and cheese on fresh white bread, a large apple, a thermos of hot coffee, and 3 chocolate chip cookies his wife had baked that morning. "My wife Mary makes these every Sunday," Red said, handing me a cookie wrapped in waxed paper. "Uses real butter, real sugar, real chocolate chips. Rationing makes it a bit tighter than before the war, but we manage fine. You boys got families back home?" "My wife Anna is in Heidelberg," I said, biting into the cookie. It was perfect. Crispy edges, soft center, chocolate chips that melted on my tongue. "I haven't heard from her since capture. The Red Cross is trying to arrange mail service." "That's rough," Red said, with genuine sympathy in his voice. "War's hell on families, always has been. My boy Tommy's in the Pacific right now, stationed on some island I can't even pronounce. Marines. Worries me and Mary sick every single day, not knowing if he's safe. His son, his only child, was fighting Japanese soldiers who'd been our allies until recently. This American man's son was risking his life in Pacific jungles, while his father sat here sharing cookies with German prisoners in Tennessee forests. The cognitive dissonance made my head spin. But the cookie was perfect. Sweet, buttery, studded with real chocolate chips, made with ingredients that Americans could still obtain despite wartime rationing, baked weekly as a casual domestic activity, shared freely with former enemies. "How much sugar do Americans get with rationing?" I asked, genuinely curious. "How much per person monthly?" "half a pound per person," Red said, not seeming to think this was classified information. Used to get more before the war started, but we make do fine. Mary complains sometimes, says she can't bake as much as she'd like. But honestly, we got it pretty good compared to folks in Europe. £0.50 per person monthly. Americans considered this severe rationing, complained about it regularly, felt it was a significant hardship. Meanwhile, Germans received 280 grams when anything was available, roughly 10 ounces compared to the 8 ounces per person that Americans considered harsh deprivation. Later that afternoon, our work detail passed a small country schoolhouse near the forest edge. Children were outside for recess, playing on swings and seesaws, their laughter carrying through the pine trees. I stopped to watch them, struck by how healthy they looked. Rosy cheeks, bright eyes, energetic movements. None of the hollow-eyed thinness I'd seen in German children even before the war intensified. A young teacher stood supervising near the building entrance. She noticed us watching, a guard and 5 German prisoners in faded Afrika Korps uniforms, and waved in a friendly manner rather than gathering the children protectively. Just waved, as if enemy prisoners near her students were no particular cause for alarm. "You boys have children!" she called over. "3 daughters," Weber called back. "In Germany. I haven't seen them in 2 years." "I hope you hear from them soon," she said, and sounded like she meant it. "We're about to have lunch. The children get milk and sandwiches from a federal program. Would you like to see? Might remind you of home." Our guard, a corporal named Jenkins, shrugged permission. We walked closer, staying appropriately distant, but able to observe. The children lined up with practiced efficiency. Each received a small carton of milk, refrigerated milk, delivered that morning by truck, and a sandwich made with fresh bread, meat, and cheese. The milk program was partially funded by the federal government, the teacher explained, designed to ensure every child got adequate nutrition regardless of family circumstances. "Every child receives this?" I asked. "Not just wealthy families." "Every single one," she confirmed. "Rich or poor doesn't matter. We believe children should have milk and proper food to learn effectively." The concept was staggering. A federal program ensuring every child received fresh milk daily, regardless of economic status. Democratic abundance extended even to education, to children, to the fundamental belief that prosperity should be universal rather than reserved for elites. One small girl, maybe 7 years old, with blonde braids and a gap-toothed smile, approached shyly and offered me part of her sandwich. Just walked up to a German prisoner and offered food with the casual generosity children show before adults teach them about enemies and borders and war. "You look hungry, mister," she said seriously. "I'm fine, thank you," I managed to say, my throat tight. "You eat your lunch." But the gesture destroyed me. This child, this American child eating subsidized lunch at a rural Tennessee school, felt sorry for a German prisoner and tried to share her sandwich. While German children went hungry, this little girl had enough food that she could afford compassion. We walked back to camp that evening in silence, each of us processing what we'd seen. The American abundance wasn't just military, wasn't just industrial. It permeated every level of society, from school lunches to cookies baked with real butter to milk delivered daily to rural children. Germany had built its entire ideology around scarcity, around the belief that resources were limited and must be taken from inferior peoples. But America operated on a completely different principle, that abundance could be created through productivity, through technology, through systems that benefited everyone rather than just the chosen few. That night at dinner, pork chops, mashed potatoes, corn on the cob, apple pie, I finally understood what we'd been fighting. Not just a military opponent, but an entirely different vision of human possibility. By September 1943, I'd gained 15 pounds in captivity. My uniform, which had hung loose on my frame after 2 years of desert deprivation, now fit properly across the shoulders and chest. I caught my reflection in the washroom mirror one morning and barely recognized myself. Healthier, stronger, better fed as a prisoner than I'd been as a supposedly elite soldier of the Reich. The psychological impact was devastating. Every pound I gained was a pound of evidence that everything I'd believed was wrong. Other prisoners showed similar transformations. Weber, who'd been gaunt and hollow-eyed when we surrendered, now looked almost prosperous. Otto's teeth had stopped hurting because the camp dentist, yes, there was a dentist, had filled his cavities free of charge. Men who'd suffered from malnutrition in the desert now walked with energy and health, fed better by enemies than by their own nation. Meanwhile, letters from Germany began arriving through the Red Cross. The news was uniformly grim. My wife Anna wrote that she'd lost 20 pounds, that food was increasingly scarce, that heating fuel was nearly impossible to obtain, that everything was worse than I'd left it. Weber's wife described their daughters scavenging for food, trading family heirlooms for bread on the black market, going hungry so the children could eat minimal amounts.